What do you think?
I think it means that like to like for hope, there's a lot of things I have to like go into it. Like I have to do like different things, like step ups, to be able to get like that hope. Like,
How do you mean that?
I mean like, that's a good question.
It's what we do here. We ask good questions.
Because like they're basically saying like in my mind, it's like hope is by nature an expensive way and need, I guess, right? So like, it's like there's things that like you have to build up for like to have hope. Now you have to see like different little things that happen to like start building the hope. I don't know how to explain it. Like, and once they are built up, like, the hope is there, and like you go from there.
Okay. So to build up hope, and then to build on top of hope.
Huh?
Should you like it takes a lot to have hope, and then to build on top of hope.
Yeah, I guess like what I think is like different little things. Like you add them and they like create like hope.
Gotcha. So a lot has to come together for hope. So there's something important there then. So what is hope?
Like to believe, like I believe this is gonna happen.
Yeah.
I hope this happens.
Yeah, we said. I have a question though. Why is the H in like brackets?
Good question. Why is the H in brackets? Because this is the middle of a sentence. So the H here would actually be lowercase. And for the PowerPoint here, it changed all the text to uppercase. But because it's the middle of a sentence, then the H would actually be lowercase if it were in its own context. So sometimes you'll see that in a quote. It just means that we're changing it to a capital. When we quote things, we got to be real specific, real clear on what came from that person, what the person actually said. You know? In one of my classes, I was telling the class that very directly, very clearly, I was telling them that I don't trust a person who tries to limit speech. The reason for it is because by limiting speech, what you're doing is you're limiting the ideas that other people get to hear. So if I have an idea and you censor me, you should be very suspicious of the person who's censoring me because they're trying to stop you from hearing something for some reason. And a lot of times it's not for your good. It isn't because they want to, it will mask it and say, well, we're trying to protect them. But that tells you a lot about what that person thinks about you. You follow? So when someone's trying to limit your speech, they're trying to limit what you get to hear, which means they're also trying to limit your ability to make your own decisions for yourself. So I said that in a class. And then a couple of days later, one of my students said, remember how you were telling us a couple of days ago that you don't really trust a person who, he said, remember how you were telling us a couple of days ago that anybody who tries to limit speech, they're basically dead to you? And I said, I never said that. And he goes, yes, you did. I said, no, I said I don't trust that person. And the student said, well, yeah, but that's the same thing. Is it the same thing that you don't trust a person? Is that the same thing as them being dead to you? No, it's very, very different. Very different context, very different meanings all around. But it's interesting that a person would hear that and really think those are the same things. When we're going to quote somebody or we're going to attribute ideas to someone, we got to be real specific about what they actually said versus what we're interpreting that they're saying. So when you see quotes, especially in academic sources, even whether a letter is capital or lowercase, you have to call attention to. So even though these are all in capitals, the H there calls attention to the fact that the others would be lowercase, and that one was changed. So it's that specific. There's your citation lesson for the day. So what is hope? When we say hope, what do we mean by that? Yeah.
Like that you want like something to happen.
And how did you mean hope?
Like you believe it's gonna happen?
Oh. So there's a distinction between hope being what we want to happen and what we believe is going to happen. So these are two different ways of understanding the word. When you guys use the word hope, which one do you typically mean? Do you mean like you want it, or is it that you think it's, or is it that you believe in it?
I want it.
Yeah. I guess the proper way, if we're thinking about like in the proper usage, this is the proper usage. That's what the word actually is more connected to, perhaps. But this is the way that we typically use it. So this is kind of like the common usage for it. So now, if we understand hope this way, just like, oh, I really want it to happen. Okay? If you actually want it to happen, how about this? Let's think of a concrete example. What would be an example of something one would hope for? If in the sense of wanting it.
The Chargers beat the Raiders.
Okay. You'll be hoping for a long time, right? So maybe we're going to want the Chargers to beat the Raiders. Okay. What were you going to say?
A promotion.
What's that?
A promotion and a job.
Oh, promotion and job. Okay. So now these are going to be two very different things. Okay, so how is it that as a Chargers fan, can you make this happen?
You can't.
You cannot. Well, I guess there's one way, but it's a long shot. You could become a Charger and single-handedly beat the Raiders. But other than that, you don't have a lot of control over it. I guess there are some, I don't know, maybe you become a mobster and you pay them off, and some kind of a point shaving thing. I don't know. But you probably don't have a lot of control over this. How much control do you have over this promotion?
A lot.
So how could you exercise control over a promotion?
So what you want is to raise, you gotta do what other people aren't doing. You gotta do the little extra stuff that other people aren't doing.
Okay. So you have to do the extras. Okay, so you have to be willing to do some extras. What are the extras that we talk about?
Showing up with a positive attitude, giving examples for others.
Yeah, exactly. Positive attitude, be an example to others. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? What's that? More time.
Like leading.
Oh, leading? Yeah. So yeah, become a leader. Yeah. So make yourself indispensable. And these are all ways that you can influence it. Now, and there are probably some other ones that we can think about as well. Is there anything about a promotion that you don't have control over?
The way
How do you mean?
Like what you decide in the end.
So yeah, you can influence what your boss might think based off of these. But maybe your boss just doesn't like you for some reason. Of course, I'd want to know why. Because if you're working hard, you're showing up on time, you're doing the extras, it'd be a weird thing for a boss not to like you. So maybe we have to figure out why that would be the case. Maybe there's some other things that you're doing that are causing that. Maybe the boss just doesn't recognize it. Maybe by doing all this extra stuff, you make the boss look bad, and the boss thinks that you want to take their job. There are some things, and as unlikely as some of those things might or might not be, you don't have complete control over it. But in the case of wanting, if you really want it, there are things that you can do to influence it. And so you do as much as you possibly can. If you wanted to go, let's say you want to go to college and you want to go to Harvard, what can you do? Well, you can't decide on Harvard's behalf. You also can't control who else is applying. In other words, if there are other people who are better candidates, you can't control whether they apply or not. All that you can do is maximize your resume and do the best that you possibly can. And this is true for a job promotion, this is true for school, this is true for even athletics. If you're an athlete, if you're a competitive athlete, you can do the most that you possibly can to maximize your performance. But a really important rule in life is that your opponent always gets a vote. Your opponent always gets a vote. You don't get to decide how things turn out, because while you're doing this, your opponent might be doing their most as well. And then there are things that are completely outside your control. Let's say that you're training for, I don't know, a race, and while you're training for a race, you roll your ankle. Yeah? It's just one of those things, man. A student in my first period, he's a volleyball player, he sprained his ankle, so he's out for a few days. I think he's in a week or two. Now, could you control that? Not really. Maybe, but probably not. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's probably going to happen. But now you're going to lose a few extra days of training that your opponent now, maybe they haven't lost those few extra days of training. So there will be some things in life that sometimes life just happens, man. Things just pop up and things happen in life. So you can't control everything. But the idea is that you want to control as much as you possibly can, because your opponent gets a vote. You know, as much as you have a desire for things to end a certain way, other people do as well. So far, so good? Okay. So now that's very different from a hope like this. Like, oh man, I really hope I get that promotion. Are you showing up on early? Early? I barely show up on time. Well, are you doing anything extra? Not really, but I don't think my boss notices, because I do it kind of when they're not looking. That's like the finger crossing, oh, I really hope that this happens. That's different from I've done everything I possibly can in order to make this happen. You know? So if we're considering that, you want to leave as little as possible to chance. The opponent gets a vote, but you want to leave as little of a vote to them as possible. You know? If you're playing, say you're racing, actually better yet, something like football, let's say, where there's referees who are involved. Or you're playing baseball, where there's umpires involved. One great way to beat the other team is to just score more runs than them. I'll say that again, make it real simple. Score more runs than them. What that means is that it doesn't matter if the umpires are calling balls or strikes against me. It doesn't matter if they're making terrible plays, terrible calls on the bases. If I just hit more home runs and score more runs than the other team, you take it out of the hands of the umpires. If you're playing football and you just destroy the other team, you play clean, even if the other team is not getting penalties called on them, you know, and you're getting more penalties called on you, if you're just outplaying the team, you want to get out of the hands of the referees. If you're a boxer, you want to knock the other person out. You don't want to leave it to the judges, because who knows how the judges are going to react. In other words, the more that you put in other people's hands, the less you have in your own hands. You want to take as much control as possible in your own hands, so that even though your opponent gets a vote, they get as little of a vote as possible. Okay? This makes sense. Now, having said that, preparation is like this too. Hope is by nature a very expensive commodity. In other words, it's very expensive to sit there and go, wow, I really, really hope it turns out this way. Because if that's all you're doing, what are the chances it's going to go your way? Pretty slim. Pretty slim, especially if you're going up against somebody who's not just relying on finger and toe crossing, as powerful of a tool as those might be to cross your fingers and toes. So it's expensive because relying on hope rather than hard work can cost you everything. Relying on hope rather than, especially in the case here he's talking about, the context here is preparation actually. You know, it's very small down here. But Thucydides, it says down here, he's an Athenian general. He was he commanded the Athenian forces during the Peloponnesian War. It's kind of a long story, but in short, he loses a battle, and the war ends up being lost against the Spartans. And so the Greeks need someone to blame, because why would the Greeks have lost the war against the Spartans? Not because the other culture is stronger, not because the other people are better, not because they're better prepared, it's because it's your fault. We oftentimes do this. It's easier to blame someone, to find someone to blame, rather than look at the whole picture and go, things got screwed up because of my role in that as well, or because we didn't prepare. So that hasn't changed over time. So the Greeks are looking, well, the Athenians are looking for someone to blame for the loss of the war, and they end up blaming Thucydides. It wasn't his fault. Even the battle he lost wasn't his fault. We understand now, you know. But they needed to blame someone who's a famous general, so they sent him into exile. And when he goes into exile, he writes this book, The History of the Peloponnesian War, and he writes it without a patron. No one's paying him to do it. It's one of the first books that we have in history where a person writes it just to write it, without being paid to do it. And so we have what seem to be his honest impressions about what happened in the war. And he gives a very, very candid account. He's critical of himself. He's critical of a lot of people and a lot of things. But it's not just criticizing to tear things down. He's saying, here's when it went well, here's what went badly. So it's a unique book in history for that. It's one of the first books that we can look at that we can say, this are probably his actual genuine thoughts about these things. And he's pointing this out about preparation, that when we're preparing to go to war, if we just sit there and go, wow, I really hope our soldiers win. That's expensive. That's going to cost you everything. Instead, what you want to do is prepare your soldiers. You want to prepare your country. You want to prepare your people. And then the more you prepare, the less you leave up to the opponent. Whoever prepares the best is probably the one who wins, with a little bit of luck. And so it's a good idea to think of most things in life that we do like that. If you're going to go for a job, prepare for it. If you're going to interview with a company, well, find out about the company. If you can, if you're going to interview with a specific person, if it's possible, like for certain higher level jobs, you can investigate, you can look into the people who are going to be interviewing you. But at the very least, if you're applying for a job, you can look into the company. So when they ask you, like, why do you want to work here? If you just go, like, I just want a job. That's different from a person who comes in with a more prepared answer. Because I want to develop certain people skills that I can only get at a job like this. You know, and if everything works out, I'd like to be able to move up in a company. And this is a company that has a lot of opportunities for someone to move up in. Which one do you hire? That one, or the one who says, I just need a gig, man? You know? You leave as, and especially if it's between these two people, you leave as little up to the opponent as possible. Do as much preparation work as you can. You know, athletics, jobs, school, relationships, anything like that at all. You know? Questions? Comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms?